Hello, I'm Terry Weaver of Chief Executive Boards International, and I'm with you today to set up this concept of front of mind, helping you explore how you might use business-to-business e-marketing tools to maintain this important concept of being at the forefront of the minds of prospects. Let's first explore what this is. Front of mind means that someone remembers you or your company, that someone also remembers what you do, that someone is also thinking about whether you can solve a problem that he or she might have, and also would call you, not somebody else, first if they thought you could solve their problem. Now, you can replace someone with a variety of different identities. Generally, in business, you'd think of someone as a prospect or a customer. Let's also consider with whom you want to be front of mind other than prospects and customers. For example, referral sources, people in your industry that others might turn to with a need. Maybe they can't solve it, but it'd be nice if they remembered that you could. And what's the penalty for failure? I'd argue the penalty for failure is someone else gets the order. If you're not maintaining front of mind and someone else is, they're going to be the first thought. They're going to be the first call when a customer decides he has a need. And how do you stay there? Well, you can stay there by means of either active touches, like sales calls or telephone calls, or passive touches, things, for example, like advertisements, sponsorships, places your logo might appear in front of someone and remind them of who you are and hopefully what you do. But here's the problem. Front of mind declines with time. Just like many things in nature, I'm going to use the half-life concept of, for example, atomic radiation. That's a well-known concept of half-life, and it's been well documented. And I think that idea applies to customer front of mind as well. For you know, when you're in front of a customer, at that moment, your front of mind with him is at or near 100%. You also know, if you've been doing this a while, that the moment you turn to leave, that front of mind starts declining. He's distracted by a telephone call, an email, something in the inbox. Something happens that starts to reduce that front of mind perception, the likelihood that he or she would remember you if he had a need. And I would argue that on some time base, we don't know whether it's a week or a month or a quarter, it doesn't really matter, over some time duration, that perception of yourself as a solution to a problem will decline by roughly 50%. And if half-life theory proved out on this, which I believe it roughly does, in another half-life time duration, that perception drops by another 50% to only 25%. In another half-life drops again, another half-life drops again, and if we draw a curve through this, we see the typical, it's known in technical circles as a decay curve, sometimes known as an asymptotic curve. It never really reaches zero, theoretically, but you don't want to be anywhere near this far out on the curve, especially if it's a ways out on the curve when your prospect discovers, finally dawns on him that he actually has a need for what it is you do. Because your competitor could just be blind lucky enough to have shown up, say, somewhere between the second and fourth half-life where this customer decided he had a need. And who's likely to get the call? If this half-life concept played out as suggested here by these curves, his likelihood of getting a call is roughly 8 times yours. Not pretty. So what do we do about this? Well, you can refresh front of mind with a touch. And almost any kind of a touch will do. That could be another sales call. It could be a telephone call, or it could be an e-marketing message. Let's say an e-newsletter coming out from your organization to a customer with some news, tips and tricks, ideas, etc., that customer might be able to use. And what happens is, when that touch happens, it respikes that front of mind right back up to 100%. You're on the customer's mind again. And if you're good enough to do that touch on roughly what you think maybe the half-life of perception decline is, I'd argue that in many businesses it's probably about a month. If you're good enough to touch that customer any of a variety of ways roughly in about a month, you spike your front of mind back up to 100%. Therefore, you don't ever take the chance that somebody else is going to show up and be at 6 or 4 or 8 times the front of mind perception of yourself. Worst case, somebody's going to be 2 to 1 over you. And with any kind of luck, maybe it works out a little bit better in your favor. These kinds of touches, I want to talk about a few ways that you could do this. First of all, the types of touch. I have coined this term active to passive. An active touch is something like a sales call. It's something that is put in the customer's hands. I'd call an e-message, an e-marketing message directed to the customer, say an e-newsletter, as a direct touch. There's a passive touch. He might go find your website. He might stumble onto your ad in a magazine or a newsletter. He might see your ad in the Symphony sponsorship brochure. Who knows? Those would be passive kinds of touches. Frequency of touch, I think we've demonstrated that. Frequency of touch, you don't want to just overwhelm people, but if that touch is seldom enough and someone else is lucky enough to get in there just ahead of you before your next touch, odds are that if that customer is making a decision anytime soon, that other person's going to get the order. And then, of course, there's a question of the cost per touch. A low cost per touch would be something like, again, an e-newsletter. A low cost per touch would be somebody has a look at your website. A high cost per touch, highest, of course, is a sales call. I've seen numbers well north of $1,000 for the cost of a sales call touch, well over $200 for the cost of a telephone call touch. And then, of course, there's the question of measurability. Low measurability would be things like, for example, print ad. You have absolutely no idea how many people saw it, what they thought of it, or when or where they might have seen it. High measurability, on the other hand, highest measurability is a personal visit. Second highest would be a phone call. You know the customer is paying attention to you because you're talking to him. So how would you like this all to work out? I'd assert that you want to be doing active touches, something that the customer recognizes came at him, that you want to do frequent touches, at least as frequent as what you think the half-life of your front-of-mind decline might be. And obviously, any of us in business would like to do things at a low cost versus a high cost, right? And then there's a question of measurability. I would rather have something measurable. If it were me, I'd rather know that the touch actually worked rather than simply print an ad, hope somebody sees it, and wonder if anybody actually ever did. So this is the idea that you can maintain front of mind in a variety of ways by a variety of means, but it's those touches, being in front of that customer with your logo, your message, and your positioning and your brand often enough so that if somebody else darts in the side door just before the customer decides he needs to do something, you're still on his mind, and at least you get an invitation to the party. Thanks for your time and attention today, and I hope you find some ways today that you can use e-marketing tools to enhance and maintain front of mind with your customers and prospects, and that this becomes a very profitable session for you. Thanks.